We need younger talent who will work for half your salary, he told me bluntly across his glass desk. You're just too expensive for where we're headed. My name is Sean Whitaker, 50 years old, Senior Client Relations Executive at Trivanta Corp in Phoenix, Arizona. 15 years of building their client portfolio from the ground up, and it ended with an 8-minute conversation on a Tuesday morning. I'd seen it coming for months. Ever since Troy Ellison took over as regional director, there had been whispers. Restructuring, modernization, cost-cutting, all the corporate buzzwords that usually mean someone with experience is about to be shown the door. Troy was 34, wore tailored suits that cost more than my first car, and had a habit of talking about disruption like it was something you ordered at a coffee shop. During meetings, he'd glance at me with this look. Not dislike, just impatience. Like I was a landline phone in a room full of smartphones. Something that still worked but didn't belong. The market's changing, he continued, barely looking up from my personnel file. We need people who understand digital natives, social media engagement. You know how it is. I did know. I just didn't agree. I'd built relationships with our top clients through thousands of phone calls, hundreds of in-person meetings, and 15 years of solving problems that marketing algorithms couldn't touch. When James from Halcyon Manufacturing had production delays that threatened to bankrupt him, I restructured his entire payment schedule over a weekend. When Catherine from Westridge Holdings lost her husband, I personally delivered the contract extensions so she wouldn't have to worry about business on top of everything else. But Troy wasn't interested in those stories. He was looking at my salary and seeing a number that could be cut in half with a 20-something replacement. I understand completely, I said, and shook his hand. He seemed relieved by my calmness, even thanked me for my professionalism. As I packed my office that afternoon, Lisa from accounting stopped by. She'd been there almost as long as I had. You okay? She asked, hovering in the doorway. I'm fine, I said, and meant it. They don't know what they're doing, she whispered, glancing down the hall. Troy's got the board convinced he's some kind of prophet. I just nodded and continued emptying my desk. What neither of them realized was that I wasn't angry. I was already thinking 3 steps ahead, because while Troy was looking at spreadsheets, I was remembering phone numbers, and promises, and 15 years of clients who didn't call Trivanta Corp. They called me. I came to Trivanta Corp when it was still called Western Business Solutions. 3 employees, a windowless office, and more ambition than clients. Back then, Harold Thompson ran the place, a former sales guy with a belief that business was built on relationships, not transactions. People signed contracts with people, he'd tell me, not companies. Remember that. I remembered. For 15 years, I lived by those words. I was the first person clients called with problems and the last person they spoke to before signing renewals. My cell phone had more direct numbers than the company directory. My marriage had paid a price for this dedication. Nancy and I divorced 8 years ago, partly because I'd prioritized Trivanta's growth over our own. My daughter Jessica spent her high school years seeing me mostly on weekends and holidays. Now at 23, she understood better. She was actually the first person I called after the meeting with Troy. They did what? Her outrage was immediate. It's business, I said, driving home with my office belongings in a single cardboard box. The new director wants his own team. After everything you've done for them? That's just wrong, Dad. She wasn't wrong. But I wasn't interested in being right. I was interested in what came next. The signs had been appearing for months. Harold had retired last year, selling his majority stake to investors who promised to maintain the company culture. 6 months later, Troy arrived with his PowerPoints and his MBA speak. Suddenly, our quarterly meetings were full of terms like market penetration and client acquisition cost. Nobody mentioned relationships anymore. 3 weeks ago, I'd walked past the conference room and overheard Troy talking to someone from HR. The legacy staff compensation is out of alignment with industry standards, he was saying, especially in client relations. Legacy staff, that's what I was now, a relic. I'd gone back to my office and pulled up my contact list. Not the company CRM, my personal records, names, numbers, 15 years of notes about kids' graduations, vacation homes, favorite restaurants, information you couldn't download from a database. Then I'd made a call to Daniel Blake, an old colleague who'd left 5 years earlier to join a competing firm. We'd stayed in touch, grabbing lunch every few months. "How's Lennox and Blake treating you?" I'd asked casually. "Growing fast," he'd said. "Actually, we were just talking about expanding the client relations team." I remembered smiling. "That's good to know." The day Troy finally called me into his office, I already had Daniel's offer letter in my email inbox. 3 days after being let go, I sat in the parking lot of Crestwick Golf Club, watching Troy arrive for his 2 p.m. tea time. He was meeting with James from Halcyon Manufacturing, my biggest client for the past decade. From my car, I could see them shaking hands, Troy's enthusiastic gestures, James's polite but reserved smile. That's when it truly hit me. Troy wasn't just replacing me. He was trying to step into my shoes. He thought client relationships could be transferred like files on a computer. Meeting by meeting, handshake by handshake, he was planning to insert himself into the connections I'd spent 15 years building. I watched them walk toward the first tee, and something settled inside me. Not anger, clarity. I started my car and drove straight to Lennox and Blake's downtown office. Daniel met me in the lobby, surprised to see me. "I thought you were taking a week to think about our offer," he said. "I'm done thinking," I replied, "but I want to modify the terms." In the conference room, I laid out what I needed: complete control over client onboarding, my own team structure, and most importantly, no non-compete enforcement against my former clients. Daniel listened, then called in Patricia Lennox herself. "You're essentially asking to bring your client base with you," she said after I'd explained my plan. "I'm not taking anything that isn't already mine," I responded. "These relationships exist because of 15 years of work. The contracts might belong to Trevanta, but the trust belongs to me." Patricia studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "Make it happen, and the terms are yours." That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad and my phone. I didn't feel vindictive. I felt purposeful. This wasn't about revenge. It was about respect for the work I'd done and the promises I'd kept. Jessica called while I was making my list. "How are you doing, Dad?" "Really?" I thought about it. "Better than expected," I told her. "Sometimes you need to get pushed out to see where you actually belong." "So what's next?" "I'm starting over." I looked down at my notes, 10 names circled on the page, but not from scratch. After we hung up, I opened my laptop and began drafting emails, not to clients, but to their assistants, the people who actually controlled access. People I'd always treated with the same respect as the executives they worked for. "Would you let them know I've moved to a new position? I'd appreciate a chance to update them personally." No pressure, no sales pitch, just the truth. By midnight, I had responses from 7 of them, all with the same message. They want to hear from you. I closed my laptop and slept better than I had in months. Tomorrow would be day 1 of showing Troy exactly what he'd thrown away. My first call was to James at Halcyon Manufacturing. No assistant screening, just direct to his cell. "Sean, I was wondering when I'd hear from you," he said, sounding genuinely relieved. "Had a golf meeting with your replacement yesterday. Spent 4 hours listening to him talk about synergy and not once asking about my daughter's graduation." "That's why I'm calling," I said. "I've moved to Lennox and Blake. But this isn't a sales call, James. If you're happy with Trevanta, that's all that matters to me." The silence lasted only a second. "Send me the paperwork," he said. "We follow you." By the end of the week, I'd had similar conversations with 6 other clients. No hard sell, just honesty. I was somewhere new. They could come if they wanted. They all wanted to. It was Catherine from Westridge Holdings who warned me first. "Your old company called yesterday," she said. "Some aggressive young man named Troy. Said you were in breach of contract, that clients couldn't legally follow you." I thanked her and immediately called Daniel. He connected me with Lennox and Blake's legal team, who confirmed what I already suspected. Troy was bluffing. My employment contract had a non-solicitation clause, but nothing that prevented clients from choosing to follow me on their own initiative. As long as you're not actively poaching, you're clean, the lawyer assured me. The next morning I arrived at my new office to find an email from Troy. The subject line read, "Cease and desist." The message was what you'd expect. Threats of litigation, claims of client interference, demands that I return all proprietary client information immediately. It ended with an offer to discuss terms of settlement before this escalates further. I printed it out and handed it to Daniel. "He's panicking," Daniel said with a thin smile. "The board must be asking questions." "He doesn't understand what's happening," I replied. "He thinks I stole something." That afternoon my phone rang. It was Lisa from Trevanta. "They're in full meltdown mode," she whispered. "Troy's been in meetings with the board all day. They're talking about client retention bonuses, emergency outreach programs. He told them you hacked the CRM. I had to laugh at that. I've never even logged into the CRM. You know that. I know. That's why I'm calling. They're bringing in an outside firm to audit the system activity. When they don't find anything, they'll have to admit I didn't steal anything. I finished for her. Exactly. But Sean, be careful. Troy's scared. He promised the board he could cut costs without losing clients. Now he's lost 7 in a week. After hanging up, I called Patricia Lennox and updated her. She wasn't concerned about the legal threats, but she was impressed by the client transfers. 7 major accounts in 5 days, she said. Without a single sales presentation. I've never seen anything like it. It's not about sales, I told her. It's about trust. Just as I was leaving for the day, my phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. "This is Troy Ellison. We should talk in person. Tomorrow 9 a.m. at Copper Blues downtown. This doesn't need to get uglier." I showed it to Daniel, who immediately advised against meeting. "He's desperate. Don't give him any ammunition." But I disagreed. I want to hear what he has to say. The next morning I arrived at Copper Blues 15 minutes early and chose a table in the back with a clear view of the entrance. Troy walked in at 9:05, scanning the restaurant until he spotted me. His confident stride couldn't hide the tension in his shoulders. "Thanks for coming," he said, sliding into the booth. "I think we got off on the wrong foot." I didn't respond, just waited. "Look," he continued, leaning forward, "what would it take to stop this client exodus? The board is breathing down my neck. Whatever Lennox is paying you, we can match it, plus a signing bonus." And just like that, I knew I had him exactly where I needed him. "I'm not interested in coming back," I said simply. Troy's professional smile faltered. "Then what do you want? A consulting arrangement? Finder's fees for the accounts you're taking?" I took a slow sip of my coffee. "You still don't get it, do you? This isn't about money." "Everything's about money," he replied with absolute certainty. "That's why you're losing." I set my cup down. Those clients aren't following me because I offered better rates or flashier service packages. They're following me because for 15 years I answered their calls on weekends. I remembered their kids' names. I treated them like people, not accounts. Troy's expression hardened. "Very touching, but let's be practical. Name your price to stop poaching our client list." "I haven't poached anyone. I haven't breached any contracts. I simply let people know where I landed, and they made their own decisions." He leaned back, studying me. "The board isn't happy. They brought me in to modernize things, streamline costs, not lose millions in accounts overnight." "And who did they blame when you told them?" I asked. His slight flinch told me everything. "That's not relevant." "It is to me." I leaned forward. "Because I'm guessing you didn't tell them the truth. That you fired the person responsible for maintaining those relationships without understanding what that meant. That you looked at my salary as a liability instead of an investment." Troy's jaw tightened. "They understand necessary restructuring comes with temporary disruption." "Is that what you call losing 30% of your revenue base in a week? Temporary disruption?" That hit home. His eyes widened slightly. 30%, it's 7 clients. 7 clients who represent nearly a third of Trevanta's annual billing, I clarified. But you wouldn't know that, would you? Because you were looking at salary spreadsheets, not client value reports. The color drained from his face. I knew then that he'd been selectively reporting the damage to the board. How many more are at risk? He asked, his voice lower. All of them, I said honestly. Every major client I handled for 15 years has reached out. I haven't even had to make the calls. He stared at me for a long moment. What happens if I go back to the board and tell them you've been actively soliciting our clients? That you took proprietary information? Then you'd be lying, I replied calmly. And your IT audit will prove it. I didn't take a single document, download a single file, or breach a single confidence. The only thing I took was 15 years of relationships that I built personally. You can't threaten me with falsehoods, Troy. He drew back as if I'd slapped him. How did you know about the IT audit? I just smiled. People talk to people they trust. That's another thing you don't understand about this business. Troy's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and something in his expression changed. A flash of panic quickly suppressed. I need to take this, he said, standing abruptly. We're not finished. But as I watched him hurry outside to take the call, I knew we were. Whatever was happening at Trevanta was accelerating faster than he could control. Later that afternoon, Daniel stopped by my office with a puzzled expression. You just got a call from Harold Thompson, he said. Isn't that your former boss? The one who retired? Former boss and former owner, I corrected him. Did he leave a number? Said you'd have it. Also said, and I'm quoting here, the board called an emergency meeting. They want to talk to you yesterday. I nodded, unsurprised. Thank you. After Daniel left, I sat back in my chair, considering my next move. The pieces were falling into place faster than I'd anticipated. Harold wouldn't have called unless something significant was happening. I picked up my phone and dialed his number from memory. They're in a full panic, Harold said without preamble when he answered. When the board realized exactly which clients had left, they called me to ask what the hell was happening. I leaned back in my chair. And what did you tell them? The truth. That the reason Trevanta has had such a stable client base was because of you. That you were worth every penny they paid you and then some. I appreciate that, Harold. It's not about appreciation, he growled. It's about 15 years of work being flushed down the toilet by some kid who thinks business is run on algorithms. The board wants an emergency session. They're asking if you'd consider coming back. I wasn't surprised, but it wasn't what I wanted. I'm settled at Lennox and Blake now. With 7 of our biggest clients, Harold noted dryly. Soon to be 10, I admitted. 3 more are finalizing their paperwork this week. A low whistle came through the phone. No wonder they're panicking. That's 46% of Trevanta's annual revenue, I finished for him. The line went quiet for a moment. You always did know everyone's numbers better than they did themselves, Harold finally said. So what's your play here, Sean? Because the board is ready to offer you Troy's job to stop the bleeding. It was tempting for about 3 seconds. Then I remembered Troy's dismissive tone, the way he'd barely looked at me during our final meeting, how quickly 15 years of loyalty had been reduced to a line item on a cost-cutting spreadsheet. I'm not interested in his job, I said. But I am interested in something else. Name it. A partnership arrangement. Lennox and Blake and Trevanta shared client services for accounts that would benefit from both firms' specialties. Harold was silent for a moment, processing. You want the board to authorize a partnership with the company that's currently gutting their client list? I want them to recognize reality, I corrected. At the rate things are going, Trevanta won't have enough major clients left to sustain operations. But a partnership would stabilize both companies. My clients get the best of both worlds. Trevanta keeps partial revenue instead of losing it entirely, and Lennox and Blake gains market share without a full-on war. And Troy? That's the board's decision, I said, though we both knew what would happen. I have no interest in his future. My only concern is for the clients and the employees who've been caught in the middle of his restructuring. Harold chuckled. You always were better at the chess game than anyone gave you credit for. I'll present it to the board tomorrow, 9 a.m. sharp. After hanging up, I called Patricia Lennox to my office and laid out the proposal. She listened intently, occasionally making notes. This is unusually generous, she said when I finished. We could just wait another month and pick up the remaining clients when Trivanta implodes. We could, I agreed. But that would hurt a lot of good people who work there. This way both companies win, the clients get optimal service, and nobody loses their job because of one man's short-sightedness. Patricia studied me for a long moment, then nodded. You really aren't doing this for revenge. Revenge is wasteful, I said. I'm interested in building something better. The next morning, my phone rang at 9:45. Harold, calling from the board meeting. They're in, he said simply. Full partnership agreement, pending legal review, and Troy's been asked to tender his resignation, effective immediately. And the employees? No further restructuring, he confirmed. The board admitted they got too caught up in Troy's vision of cost-cutting. They forgot what actually makes this business work. I thanked him and hung up, feeling a weight lift that I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying. It wasn't about winning. It wasn't about revenge. It was about setting things right. Patricia appeared in my doorway, eyebrows raised in question. We have a deal, I told her. Now we build something better than either company could have managed alone. She smiled. All because they underestimated the quiet guy who just nodded and walked away. 6 weeks later, I stood at the podium in Lennox and Blake's conference room, facing a crowd of familiar faces, clients from both companies, board members, staff. The partnership announcement was being made official today. Troy wasn't there, of course. Last I'd heard, he'd taken a position with a startup in Tucson where his cost-cutting approach might actually be appropriate. Today marks the beginning of something unique in our industry, I said, looking across the gathered faces. Not a merger, not an acquisition. A true partnership built on the understanding that business relationships are built by people, not spreadsheets. From the back of the room, I spotted Harold grinning proudly. Beside him stood Lisa and several other Trivanta employees who'd been worried about their futures just weeks earlier. The partnership agreement was elegant in its simplicity. Clients could choose which company would be their primary service provider, but would have access to the specialized services of both. Revenue would be shared based on service utilization. And most importantly, the client relations teams from both companies would be unified under my leadership. After the formal announcement, James from Halcyon Manufacturing approached me, shaking his head in amazement. When you left Trivanta, I was ready to follow you anywhere, he said. But this is even better. You turned getting fired into the best thing that could have happened for everyone except the guy who fired you. Catherine from Westridge joined us, nodding in agreement. That young man never understood what he was throwing away, she said. But we did. As the event wound down, Patricia Lennox found me by the windows overlooking the city. The board is calling it a masterstroke, she said. In 6 weeks, you've transformed both companies and secured client loyalty that should last for years. I shook my head. I just reminded everyone of something they already knew. Business isn't built on cost-cutting. It's built on relationships. And revenge? She asked with a slight smile. Was that part of it? The best revenge wasn't taking the clients, I replied, looking out over Phoenix. It was showing everyone the right way to keep them. 1 month after the partnership announcement, I left the office early to meet Jessica for dinner. She'd been following the whole story with a mix of pride and amazement. So technically, you're now more powerful than you were before, she said as we settled into our booth at the restaurant. I shrugged. It's not about power, it's about doing things the right way. Still, she persisted, the guy who fired you is gone. You've basically got 2 companies reporting to you now, and all your clients think you're some kind of business genius. I'm just a guy who answers his phone on weekends, I said, smiling. After dinner, I drove home to my quiet house, thinking about the journey of the past few months. From being unceremoniously dismissed to reshaping an entire sector of Phoenix's business landscape. It had never been about getting back at Troy. It had been about proving that what I'd built over 15 years had real, lasting value. The next morning, I arrived at my office to find a small package on my desk. Inside was a framed photo of the original Western Business Solutions team. Just Harold, myself, and 2 others, standing in front of that tiny first office 15 years ago. The note with it read simply, "People sign contracts with people. Never forget that. Harold." I placed the frame on my desk where clients would see it when they visited. A reminder of where it all started and why it mattered. Later that day, I had back-to-back meetings with clients from both Trevanta and Lennox and Blake. Not crisis management, not damage control, just the regular relationship-building conversations that had been my specialty for 15 years. As I picked up the phone to make my first call, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time, pure satisfaction. Not from winning a corporate battle, but from knowing that doing business the right way, the human way, still mattered. In the end, Troy had done me a favor. By trying to replace me with someone cheaper, he'd proven just how valuable I really was. And that was a lesson worth every minute of the journey.